Hello everyone and welcome back to the next episode of Art Side of Life, where I chat with inspiring artists 5 days a week. My name is Eva and my guest today is Devon Cady-Lee, and in this episode you will learn some awesome tips on how to design characters and why it's important to work hard, especially at the beginning of your art career.
At that point I was like, yep, that's what I want to do. So I was like full steam ahead in that direction, and I would spend like I would stay late doing things, and definitely over time, I was just trying to basically prove that I could work in a professional environment.
Devon is a freelance character designer and concept artist living in Seattle, United States. Most of his career he has been in games as a character designer and an illustrator for studios like Warner Bros Turbine, Wizard of the Coast, 38 Studios, and St. Boston, and latest being Motiga games on the title Gigantic. So please welcome Devon Cady-Lee and let's get to the interview. So welcome everyone to the next episode of Art Side of Life, and I'm super happy to have Devon here. Hi!
Hi.
Super happy that you took time and joined us here.
Thank you for contacting me.
And let's just dive right in then to your background story, and maybe you can share some of your artistic, creative adventures when you were a child, or what was like the first creative thing you remember?
Oh, sure. Oh man, the first thing. I remember. Also, when did I start drawing? I mean, I was drawing since I was little, but I always had a lot of paper lying around because my dad kind of worked as a doctor's. He translated things for doctors.
Oh,
I don't know how to write what his job is, but basically doctors don't know how to write. So his job was to take their audio scripts and transcribe it essentially. So he had a lot of paper lying around, like a lot of just copy paper, and I would just take reams of his paper and doodle on them for hours. And they'd be like comic books almost. They'd be like, I draw one panel and then next paper, one panel next, and he hated it because I would go through a whole ream of paper with just one tiny drawing on it.
Yeah.
There's stuff like ants.
Oh, ants.
That or things hatching. So it'd be like an egg, and I would just draw a circle. Next piece of paper, and then it would be now the egg is cracking. Next piece of paper. It was like that.
Oh, cool! I was wondering, what stories did you create?
They're just sort of weird nature evolving stories, like creatures growing and changing and things like that. Oh, here comes the cat.
And were your parents expecting that you will become an artist, or what was the conversation when you told them first time, okay, I want to take this professionally?
It was, they were accepting of it pretty much. I was not doing very well in school at the time. I was a pretty bad student, so art was kind of the only realistic option for me, honestly. It was just I had to get good at it, or I was not probably going to have a job. So, because I was getting left behind in school and things like that. It was actually kind of sad at the time. But, basically my parents were both of my parents are artistically inclined. So they were open to it. But they weren't, they were, I don't think they were super confident I could get a job yet, as an artist, until basically I proved I could get into an art school, and they didn't really have a lot of money, so it was also kind of difficult to find, a way to it was hard for me to get to a private school or any big college. So I really had to work hard to get more on my portfolio ready, so I could try and get scholarships and things like that. So. It took some convincing, but I think eventually when I was able to get into an art school, they were like, okay, he can do it. And then they were and then they invested.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And so how did you find the scholarships, or how did you prepare for applying for a scholarship? Because maybe some people don't even know that there are options or many options for scholarships and how to find them.
Yeah, sure. It really depends on the art school too. Because some art schools are much skimpier with their scholarships than they're much more. They could be skimpy with their scholarships. And some provide a full ride if if you qualify. I mean, like, you know, I remember Cooper Union used to have a free tuition until recently.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is in the States, so
Mm-hmm.
I mean, uh, the government doesn't really pay a lot of money towards art schools. So the art schools are pretty much like, you know, a lot of them are funding themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so art schools can be pretty expensive in the U.S., unfortunately. And yeah, it's difficult to find a scholarship,
Yeah.
especially now, because I think the U.S. is going through some pretty hard times. I'm pretty envious of like, now that I've like traveled outside of the U.S., like seeing other countries where they have like, real, money invested in their art, is really like really cool to see. I really like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So there are different areas where you can even study for free, but now there are also options,
Yeah.
to study online. So that's a good thing for every starting artist as well. And so, which were kind of the
Yeah.
biggest decisions, you had to do in order to get where you are now, like the applying for a school and getting there, as you mentioned. And what are the other
Mm.
like biggest points for you?
Well, for me, I mean, at the time, it was just like I was more concerned about I'm from New York City and I didn't want to really move too far away from New York at the time, so I was really looking for a school on, on this coast. That was and I just wanted to make sure that I could see my family regularly and my friends and things like that. So for me, that was really important. Um, and there were a few schools I applied to. I applied to Parsons. I think I tried to apply to Cooper, SVA, and Rhode Island School of Design. And I got into Rhode Island School of Design. I got into the other schools as well, but from what I didn't really know a lot about colleges or art schools or anything like that. So it was recommended to me that I go to RISD from my guidance counselor. She was one of the first people who was like, "Oh, you could get into an art school," and I was like, "I can." And I was like, I didn't really even think I could qualify because my grades were so low. So I didn't really know if I could even get in like through the front door. So
Yeah.
she gave me the confidence to be like, "Yeah, you should apply," and I did, and that's basically what happened. And outside of that, I was just trying to practice and be good on my own. I would just get like tons of. That's like basically when I started taking art seriously, I really started ramping up on like, getting books about dynamic anatomy and, drawing and rendering and painting. Like I never really painted before I went to art school. So that was like a learning experience for sure. I'm still learning. So it was like a really hard time, but I think at the end it was rewarding because I ended up being able to get into a school. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. And can you maybe recommend some books you liked, something you learned from, as you mentioned, like anatomy, or do you remember some names of the books which kind of like stuck to you?
Oh, sure. I remember getting a lot of Bern Hogarth's books when I first started. Yeah, he did a lot of he did a whole book on dynamic lighting, dynamic anatomy. He was an illustrator for like Tarzan and things like that. So he was like a comic book artist. And at the time, I was really into comic books. Like comic books is like kind of where I was like kind of gearing towards, which is another reason why I was like, oh, I'm never gonna be able to get a job because comic book artists are really it's hard to make a living as a comic book artist. But Bern Hogarth gave me some hope because I was like a master draftsman. I really aspired to just drawing, and like he was like an amazing drawer, So I was like, I want to be that guy. So I got like at least 3 of his books when I first started, and I pretty much like was like married to those books for a while. Like they're pretty worn out now. And yeah, I think that was definitely my jump off point. That was Bern Hogarth. I mean, there's definitely like later books that I found interesting and useful, but he was like the guy that really made a big impression on me.
Oh, really cool. And how was it to find the first job from the university, or was it also during the time you were studying that you maybe got like first commissions, or how was it to like putting your foot in the industry?
The first kind of professional taste I had was it was at a book publishing company called Hyperion Publishing, which was really not anything close to what I was interested in, but it was the first time kind of being in a professional environment, with like, other artistic people like doing artistic stuff, but it was more oriented towards book cover graphic design. So it had absolutely nothing to do with what I had, but it did prove that I could hold a job and like be useful in a social space, which is important. Like being able to like communicate with, you know, superiors and like you're being able to have coworkers and things like that. Like that was like a new thing for me. So it was like it was good to have. I mean, outside of that, the only things that I had were like odd jobs, but otherwise it was just like
And
that was like the first
how did you find this
experience.
first job? Did you just apply to like
I just
local?
applied to anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty much, and this is when I was still in school, so it was like
Mhm.
it's kind of like a scholarship thing, and I got credit for doing it. So
Ah, cool,
it was
cool.
kind of so the school provided like like lists of like people that might be interested, and I was like Hyperion Publishing was kind of connected to Disney, very disconnectedly, but it is. So I was like, okay, I had no idea how any of that works, so I was like, all right, I'll do it. Um, and then but the first time I actually got into like something I was interested in doing was right after I graduated, um, I applied to Turbine Games
Hmm.
in Massachusetts, um, and at the time they were working on Lord of the Rings Online, and they needed contract artists to do texture work. So it was just like taking models that already existed and painting like new, like basically creating characters with textures, essentially what it was. So that's kind of what I was doing pretty much for like 6 months.
Hmm.
And then, and that was my first job, was like a 2D contract artist.
Hmm.
And then, after a while, they started having me do a little concept work. I was still on contract and I was still technically a 2D contract artist, but they were having me do some concept on the side because my art director had faith in me. Um, uh, and Yaming Di, he was from China. He's an interesting man. But yeah, he gave me my first chance to do some concept artwork. And it was just like, minions and things like that. I mean, MMOs require tons of content, more than most games. So it was like, they just need bodies and seats making stuff.
Yeah.
And, I was just like those bodies. Yeah.
So, what was like the best advice maybe you received during the time you were just starting out to the concept art?
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Well, I mean, Yaming specifically, it was like, you have to, was like, I want you to impress everyone. I want you to make a really good impression so that I can basically back you up, essentially is what he was saying. Like, he was encouraging me to like really kind of like show off a bit
Hmm.
and just like kind of like work, um even though I was doing contract, to work on expanding basically what I could do and show it. And that's why he was giving me some opportunities to do concepts. So I took them very seriously, because pretty much at that point I was like, yep, that's what I want to do. So I was like full steam ahead in that direction, and I would spend like I would stay late doing things, and definitely over time, I was just trying to like basically prove that I could work in a professional environment. I was asking a million, which was actually super annoying for everyone around me. I remember I was asking so many questions. Like the assistant art director at the time, Harry Teasley, he was like, I was bugging him constantly. We're really good friends, but I mean, I was just, at the time, I was just like this annoying kid in his ear being like, what's this do? I don't know what this does. Can you help me with this thing? And yeah. So, that was kind of like how I first started, was just like asking as many questions as possible and getting ramped up as quickly as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's, yeah, I wouldn't say that I necessarily had anything specific that someone said to me. It was just sort of like things I slowly learned, I guess,
Hmm.
just like doing it a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And being like, oh, I should like, like working in a professional environment, you have to talk differently. You have to speak differently. It's like, these are other human beings that you have to see every day. So kind of getting used to that and like understanding being a professional is like was really important adjustment for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
As opposed to just being this like solo guy, just like working in a basement, you know? So,
So, what would you
yeah.
advise someone like a starting artist if they want to do something like what you do now, or like developing even their own game in the future? What is maybe like the best or most interesting things you learn over time of your art career? You know, like at least some tips when you are starting out, and it's like, okay, maybe you should do this or shouldn't do this.
hmm Um, I mean, it's like pace. I definitely learned like from burning out like that I had to pace myself and like, you know, like you really have to meter how much investment you have in a project. Like if you really love a project, you know, like going ham and like really investing yourself into it is like really important because that's really like, especially projects of love, like projects that you really love, you really have to invest your everything into it as much as possible. But the problem is like sometimes that can backfire, and you know, sometimes it's hard to make those kind of investments all the time. So you really have to like kind of pick your battles, I guess, and like really monitor how much time you're taking on things. Like I think one of the things you learn over time is your speed and what you can do with your speed. And everyone, I think people work at different speeds, and knowing what your limits are and knowing what your advantages are, like trying to get familiar with like why do people look for you?
Yeah.
Like, why do people seek you out? You know, why do you stand out? Why do people not look for you? You know, like why are, you know, are people, like if I have a contract for a while, and if they don't give me another contract, I'm like, well, it was probably because I was too slow, or probably because I didn't match the style, or maybe I wasn't listening to the art director. So being especially when you're working, like right now I'm doing a lot of contract work, being self-critical is really important. And if you're not good at being self-critical, then having a group that you can rely on, like a small team of like artists, just like colleagues, is really useful to have as well. So like having a circle of like, you know, tight art friends, which is fortunately, you know, you go into art school, that's one of the advantages is you become friends with a bunch of artists. And a lot of my friends are are amazing artists, fortunately. So I can always you know, ask them for what their experience is with in a business. I can even ask them, you know, have you had this client before? You know, what's the workload like? You know, like things like that. It's very useful to be able to network.
Yeah.
I'm really not into schmoozing, so I'm really, it's hard for me to necessarily make new connections. So I like to just stick with the solid friend groups that I have, and like, you know, being able to just trust those people. And eventually, like over time, like when you work in multiple jobs, like you just become friends with like a lot of different artists. So another thing I would say is when you're first starting out, it might be good to at least hold a job for a year and then move. But I stayed at Turbine for 3 years. But, you know, get around, like don't become embedded in one project for too long, because you'll learn way faster by circulating yourself among other projects.
That's true.
Like I didn't realize that in the beginning, and now when I hop around and I do more contract work, because of the amount of variety and like different challenges that I'm faced with, I feel like I improve myself at a faster rate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that helps. Yeah,
Oh, definitely. Do
it's
you
kind of like throwing yourself into the fire, but I know that's the greatest advice, but it's kind of like just throw yourself into the fire.
And then you have
Um,
also more connections and more like bigger group of friends, as you mentioned. So definitely that's really
yes.
good. And do you do
Yeah.
networking also in a different way? Do you also go for conventions maybe, or like through social media, or it's mostly through your colleagues and yeah, working within teams?
At this point, so I've had the weird history of working for a lot of studios that had a lot of incredibly talented artists and people, and then the studios would shut down. So what would end up happening, but not because of the art, it was because of like whatever. It could have been bad management or the game didn't even function or whatever. But as a result, I know a lot of like amazingly talented artists, and now all of them are in a lot of very big, high-profile companies and things like that. So now it's actually really easy because as a result of that, to uh, just like hit them up and be like, hey, what's going on, and like I can find out what's happening at their major company. So it's not really, and I've never really, I'm definitely still seeking to do personal projects that are more like what I want to do, and it's harder to do at big studios. But I'm still willing to work for those big studios. It's just not necessarily full time. So because I still want to have space, I really want to work on projects that embrace my own art style, and it's harder to do at a bigger studio. So at the moment, yeah, I guess that's kind of what I've been doing and I guess social media is important. I'm really bad at it, like promoting myself. I'm just really bad at promoting myself in general. So, I mean, I just try and post as much as possible on like Instagram and Tumblr and things like that.
And you mainly work with your digital works, right? So like Photoshop and then Cintiq or Intuos or other tools like that.
Yes. I have a Cintiq. I have a 21-inch UX, which is like the most expensive thing I think I own. Like if that gets damaged, I'll be really sad. Actually, I got it refurbed. Another advantage of working at a bunch of studios that close down is they sell all their stuff really cheap when they go out of business. So I got a Cintiq that's normally like $2,000. I got it for like $800.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's $800. That's a lot. It's a big discount. Yeah, and I just got a new computer recently, actually. So we'll see how that turns out. But I'm transitioning right now. I'm transitioning to doing full contract for a while. So I'm like getting a new setup essentially, so I can handle the workload at home.
Yeah, and so how was the transition for you? What was going in your head? When you decided, okay, I want to do more stuff on my own and more contracting, opposed to working in a studio.
It's just a matter of like, when you're working on a studio, you get a little burned out on the project sometimes. So it's definitely good to sit and be embedded for a while to really like get into a good groove. And like, over 3 years, like I worked on Lord of the Rings for 3 years, and I worked on, Gigantic for 3 years and Infinite Crisis. So it was having enough time to actually build a look and like define an aesthetic is actually what people are looking for when you're trying to get hired, is that you can like develop a look that has its own, feeling and flavor, and it's part of you. So you can't really do that if you don't spend enough time on one project. Like you really get your voice like into the game, and then you can really really kind of like show people this is what I do. And then hopefully it's the closer and closer you get it to what you actually want to do, people will hire you for that. Yeah. So, Gigantic was great because I love the style of working in Gigantic, and now I get contract work based on what I did in Gigantic, kind of a thing. So it's like that kind of a thing where it's where now that I've worked on a project where it really matches my kind of an aesthetic that I really enjoy, now I can get hired for it because I have this portfolio of 3 years of work doing it. So people know for sure that I can do it.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, contract I've just started doing contracts. So it's pretty overwhelming. I mean, taxes are different here. You got to do taxes quarterly. Yeah. And you got to, Michelle's like laughing at me because I'm really bad at taxes, and also just you have to manage your own time and things like that. You have to negotiate your rates, which is pretty stressful, but whatever.
So how do you do that? Like, do you ask the company to give you the budget, or do you give them like this is my rate, or how does it work, the negotiation?
Yeah, it's never straightforward. It's I think it's different with every company that I've been at. So yeah, like bigger companies, they ask for like a lot of they ask for like game companies, not on a chain, like big game companies. They have like a lot of non-disclosure agreements you have to sign and things like that. I've worked for animation studios, and that's a different process. And actually, a lot of them pay less. So, like right now, video game companies pay more for concept artists, in my experience, unless you're probably an embedded artist. You know, if I was working at Weta, it would be different. But if you're doing things for just like an effects studios and things like that, you know, they have their own kind of thing. And there's no really defined rate. So sometimes they'll come up to you with a rate and they'll say this much, and I'll be like, no, I can't really afford that. And then they'll be like, okay, how about this much? And then they're like, okay. Now that's usually how those conversations go. If they ask me for a rate, then I'll give them my rate. But and then, you know, whether or not they take it is fine. And then they might lowball me or say, oh, we can pay you higher, depending on the budget. But what usually ends up happening is if there's a company with like a lot of money and I know that they have a lot of money, I will probably charge them more because that's just how it is, because they can afford it. And they're totally fine with doing that as long as you provide quality service, you know. So you're providing a service, and you're also providing the equipment that comes with all of it. Like I have to pay for Photoshop, I have to pay for the Cintiq, you know, all that stuff is being paid for. So I can mark up, and my health insurance and dental and things like that. So
definitely,
I mark up. I basically base it off what my salary was and then mark up from there. So that's a good way to do it, is like just find out what you're being paid. That was an advantage of me starting full-time doing in-house studio work, is that I had a salary and I could kind of rate myself based on that, you know, like a starting off.
Yeah, exactly. Just calculate like how many hours you work, then what is the monthly salary, then you divide and all of that. Yeah, definitely. That's a good idea. Yeah. And because as you mentioned as well, like Lord of the Rings, I also worked on Lord of the Rings, but with Lego, so it's like definitely different style, but it was fun. So and how is it with your art style? Yeah, and maybe if you can mention like some of the things which are always there, like what is kind of recognizable part of your art style?
I usually ask other people that because it's hard for me to always know myself. But I mean, I'm like when I was working on the last few projects I've done, I've gotten a lot more shapy. I'm trying to do a lot more things that are just more about strong silhouette design. Gesture is really important for me. Like having a good line of action and things. And I do a lot of pinup. I do a lot of fantasy stuff. I do a lot of sci-fi stuff. That's usually my favorite. And recently I've been getting a lot more into, like outside of art, I practice dance, like, you know, dance. So I'm part of dance culture, like hip hop and house music kind of a thing. So I'm trying to get into more like, you know, urban culture design and things like that, and like trying to help my community in that sense. So I've been it's like not everybody knows me necessarily for one thing. I think if you look at my portfolio, I kind of have like a stylistic ADD. I can't really stick to like one style for too long because I like experimenting with different styles and like different levels of realism and abstraction and things like that. So it's kind of difficult actually for me to nail like what my style is right now. But I mean, I have general themes that I'm attracted to, I guess.
And when you are creating a character, is there something which is always important for you, or maybe you can share some tips when creating like a fantasy character?
I think it's really important when you're designing characters in like tropes that already exist, like fantasy has a lot of tropes, is to really kind of expand outside of what the expected reference material would be, I guess. Like I feel like a lot of problems with a lot of game art is that they don't really look outside of game art. Is the problem. Like the game art, it's kind of, you know, it's it's kind of incestuous to, you know, it just kind of feeds into itself. Like people are looking at other game artists and, you know, and like they're referring to other games for their game art, and the problem is it's very circular and like it doesn't really leave the boundary. So I feel like my advice to people that really want to like stand out is to really take, ideas from outside of that world. Like get outside of the studio. You really got to get to a museum. You got to read some books, you got to go online, try and travel as much as possible, because a lot of the inspiration for a lot of things is from the real world. It's not really from other games, because games are games. It's just like they exist because of rules that were set up for no reason. So it's like 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 a lot of the the whole like mage and fighter and like cleric and like all these things are just from Dungeons and Dragons. Like everything is a reciprocal of like Dungeons and Dragons, and then Dungeons and Dragons is just like straight up Lord of the Rings online. I mean, straight up Lord of the Rings, not Lord of the Rings online, straight up Lord of the Rings. So it's like a lot of these tropes are just like perpetuated, and it's really important to try and branch out of that. Like refer to other things. Yeah.
Definitely. Have you had like a favorite character as well? What you ever created, or some other characters from something else?
Well, my personal favorite has been Taito. A lot of the characters I designed for Gigantic are more my favorites, like Wu and Taito, things like that. And those are probably characters that reflect like what I really like enjoy doing the most is like creating like characters that kind of feel or give you the impression of things that you know about, but it's hard to nail necessarily like one thing. I think those are successful characters to me. Like I'm not like super creative. I just like to I have a lot of memories of things that I used to experience, like video games growing up. And I just said don't refer to video games, but TV shows, movies, the museums, just like all the things I had when I was growing up, and I was fortunate enough to have like experiencing all those things, and just like the impression and the memory of those things. A lot of them get lost on depending on the generation. So it's funny, like I'll make things that like for me it's like, oh well, this is clearly a Cabbage Patch reference, and everyone's like, what the hell, what's Cabbage Patch? I don't even know, like most people don't even know what that is. So it's like it's pretty fortunate, I guess, that I was exposed to a lot of garbage when I was younger, because I have a lot of like reference material to like draw from. In that sense, I was like really obsessed with like reading novels and watching television when I was younger, like a lot of media. So a lot of the characters I want to design are sort of like homages to all this, storytelling stuff that I had experienced long before. Yeah, I guess that's what it is.
And so how do you kind of take or approach observation, if you see some character somewhere or you have it in like your mental library? So what do you use from it? Or is it like the outfit or the hair you like, or the behavior? And maybe you can mention some of these characters, what you just talked about, if someone haven't played the game, or if they don't know your characters are about, like what is it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like for instance, all right. Well, Taito, for instance, like he was the first character I designed for Gigantic, but he's still like one of my favorites for it. But at the time, the assignment was create a mysterious warrior guy with a pet companion, right? So it was pretty open ended. So the character, he has a mask and he has a cape, and he has a little pet ferret, and he has a sword, and that's kind of like his theme. So for me, the two things I drew the most from were Batman, because I was like, I want to make a dude with a cape that's like mysterious, right? Who's better than that is Batman, right? And the other part of the puzzle was the companion, but he was supposed to be a master swordsman. So the thought process there was, well, if most of the fighting is going to rely on his skill as a swordsman, then his companion really can't be the main source of damage. Like, it can't be on a mount, right? Because then the mount's doing all the work. It's not really a sword. Like, who would blast giant tiger or something like that and then use a sword. Like that doesn't make any sense. So I was like, he has to have a pet that's kind of like a companion. That's kind of like, he's like where the guy is still the highlight, but the pet is sort of like, you know, still there. He's like a peripheral pet. So I wanted something that could kind of like ride on his shoulder, like a monkey or a parrot or something like that. And then I remember there's a movie called Beastmaster. I don't know if you've ever seen Beastmaster, but there's two ferrets. And that stuck with me for a really long time because they were super useful, but they weren't like combat necessarily. They would just kind of like go and get stuff for the guy, or they would like, I think at one point he's like, they rescue him from a mud pit and stuff like that. So I like those, like, you know, I just wanted like a cute little character to be able to do that. So that's kind of like where that inspiration kind of came from. And then what was another reference I was making? And I was I'm also really into like, like currently like Mesopotamian and like, you know, like really old art from sort of like Middle East, but and around that area, that region. Like a lot of the details, like the headdresses and things like that, are really inspiring for me. Like a lot of the different jewelry that they wear. So I wanted to take that aesthetic and kind of like bring it in to the character. And between those things, oh, and of course the owl, because he's so I wanted the character to be quiet, like he didn't speak. So I was like, well, and because he's mysterious, right? So I was like, well, what's a quiet animal? Owl. Owls aren't actually that quiet. They're pretty loud sometimes, but you know, when they're fighting, they're pretty quiet.
When they fly, they're quiet. Yeah.
Yeah, when they're flying, they're hunting, they're very quiet. You know, otherwise they're like screeching all the time. Yeah, but I don't know. It like, you know, in my head, that's kind of like what I was going for. So it doesn't really make sense in the bigger span. You know, I mean, Pac-Man is like, you know, completely black and like dark and stuff like that, and my character's like bright red. You know, so some things don't match up. Oh, and also I was also very inspired by that. So I chose red because I had just gotten off playing Journey, and I love Journey. And I was like, oh man, I want to keep that as like a bright red thing. That was like that makes him stand out in the environment, kind of. Yeah. And that's kind of like the like I was like, I want like a hero that's like mysterious, but like still like when he shows up, he's sort of like Zorro. Like everybody knows he's there, right? He's not like hiding. He's just kind of like bam, and he just like beats everybody up. So I wanted to have, he still should have some like flourish, you know. He wasn't like a guy who just like hides in the back. He like once you see him, he's like, oh my god, that guy. So I kind of wanted to give him that kind of like iconic look where kind of like Batman and Zorro, where they show up and it's like, oh man, it's that guy, you know, that kind of feeling. So
definitely.
So that's kind of how I use inspiration, I guess. It's kind of like the feeling, the impression that things leave on me, and that can be conscious or unconscious. Like I can do that knowingly or unknowingly, because things will just be like back here, and they'll just like I'll just draw something, and I won't even realize why I did it that way until I'm like, oh yeah, that's because this thing made an impression on me when I was like 12 years old.
Oh, cool.
I can't get out of my brain. Okay, that kind of thing. So I'll realize it later.
Okay, yeah. So your creative process is not like that. You kind of sit down and you do like a brainstorm, like I wanna this from here, but you mostly do the sketches, and then something will come out, and then you do different variations, and then you have something what you like.
Yeah, I mean it's very like feeling based, unfortunately, which sucks sometimes, because if you don't have the feeling, then it's just like not there, right? So you just have to keep drawing until the essence of the character, until you catch something that's has charm to it. I think it's really important for me to have charm. Like your characters have to be able to connect with them in some way, in a very, very human way. Even if they're not human characters, you have to be able to connect with that character very well. So charm is really important. Unfortunately, in video games, it's very difficult to have like different kinds of charm. Usually, everyone in games wants the same kind of charm. When you work in animation, everyone's like, it's more story based, and characters serve more of a storytelling function of like, this character is a good guy and this character is a bad guy, but it's not straightforward, and like you can tell because he has a scar in his thing or whatever. Like small details like that, it's harder to convey that sort of thing in video games, and the story in video games is usually a function of the character is. So usually all my decisions revolve around what the function of the character is doing. So if it's a fighting game character, that's a bad example. If it's if it's a, I mean, whatever the purpose of the character is,
Mm-hmm.
all of my details and my decision making try and revolve around making that clearer and better.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that helps me edit. It's basically like taking a character, being like, okay, yeah, like with Taito, like having those bullet points.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and really, trying to edit myself to make sure that it's as clear as possible, and it's not like this convoluted thing with like too many details. If you add like, oh, he's got a scar here and he's got like all these like little details, it can get kind of muddled. Because when people look at something like that, they kind of just see the impression of the whole thing at once. It's not really like they're looking at all these little details. So I want that first overall impression to be really good. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really good
Okay.
insight, and I was wondering as well, maybe how do you connect the characters? Like, what are maybe the traits if you're creating a cast, of the characters? Because everyone needs to be unique, right, in the game. And but maybe you have like some mark everyone has on the shoulder, or they have some color which goes through the cast. So how do you connect the cast of characters?
Like when you're like stylistically and things like that,
Yeah. Or with
or
the
like
story.
story-wise,
Yeah.
or both. I guess
Or
I guess they're
both.
both. They're the same thing, I guess. Yeah. Because I mean, like usually like the overall tone, like as the clearer the project you're working on, like the clearer the writing is, and the clearer the actual gameplay is, it's much easier to design characters for me, because I know it gives me a much more honed objective to work towards, so I can really just kind of focus on making that the star of the show. Like okay, for instance, if there's a character that like can leap up walls and climbs, that's the story of that character. In a sense. So it's like everything I do to design that character is going to serve the purpose of that. Like, okay, well, I mean, some like obvious, like some more obvious things would be like, oh, it's like a bug man, for instance, he's a bug, so that way that, if it was like a dude, it would still make sense. You could still have a guy like running up the wall. But if you have the ability to work on an IP where they let you do anything, then yeah, I'm going to choose like an animal guy that can like climb up walls, because it's what, for me, it makes more sense that, you see a character that is a bug or a cat or something that can climb very well, and you're like, oh, he's going to climb, so it's like, it seems really obvious, but like, trying to kind of hone everything around that storytelling is really important for me. Like if the character is evil, like, or not evil, like let's say he's like a protagonist, that or if I'm designing a protagonist and an antagonist, like trying to make them related to each other, like if the bad guy has like some sort of connection to the good guy or something like that, I'll try and make that visually clear rather than relying on the storytelling. So like having some sort of like color connection or color contrast is really, I think about those like things in context with each other. If this character is really like loud and talks a lot, I'll make his mouth bigger. Like literally straightforward details like that is what it's like what I think about. And it seems really simplistic, but it, at the end of the day, it becomes pretty hard to do, because when you're editing down and like trying to really boil down the essence of what you're trying to do, you start running out of stuff, and you also start running out of ways to make it look unique, because you're dealing with very little. So, and especially when I was working on Gigantic, that was like probably the biggest challenge, is like working on trying to design characters that were minimal and still were very like bold and charming for you to be attracted to. So it's very difficult to balance that, in my experience, but that's kind of why it's fun. I guess that's why I like doing it, because it's like a puzzle for me. So, like especially if I'm designing a cast of characters, I'll draw all of them at once and be like, what's the unifying theme of these guys? What's the unifying theme of these guys? And that's usually driven by like things I'll read about in their story, like if they're noble or if they're chivalrous or if they're like corrupt and evil. Like I want to be able to visually show all of that. And it's not always easy, but the more I study about shape language and things like that, and making things where it's like the initial impression of shapes is enough to tell you what that character is about, the better service I'm doing, I guess. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Definitely. Yeah. Because if you have like evil characters or whatever, everyone can have like a sharp something on them, on their outfit, right? Or something like that.
Yes, exactly. And like that will say something different than if it's a bad guy and he's entirely circular. Like what if there's this like, like what does a circular character say? And you want to make that evil. Like how do you do that? It's like how do you do that without spikes? Like what if we take out I like to so those are kind of challenges I like to do is like okay, this is the obvious route for what this character is going to be. So how do I, if I want to make it a more subversive, like that's like not as obvious design, like maybe the character is like a reveal character where later he becomes a bad guy. Those are my favorites. Like where they make like transitions, like how do I show that in just shapes? I designed a character where he had really big colorful hands. He was like an alien, and he would like talk with his hands a lot and be like, ah. He was like a salesman almost. And then the way I tried to show that he was kind of like Two-Face is that he always had a second pair of hands that was always over here doing this. And like that was just and that enough by itself was enough to make him creepy, and also being like a little like hidden and like subversive without straight up saying, oh, this guy is the bad guy. It's kind of like I'm just trying to do a more subtle way of showing that this character is like that, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Because then you start thinking about it, like, oh, is it or is it not, or what is happening there?
What is this character? What is this character choosing to hide? And, what is this? If you get into the head of the character and like what decisions he would be making, that's like a great way to show like what they would wear as a costume. Like you want to get into that character's head and be like, well, they're not going to be running around in like a metal bikini because that doesn't make any sense. Why would they be doing that? But maybe it does make sense. Depending, it really just depends on like how the character is thinking. So if you can basically be the character for a little bit, if you can put your head into the head of the character, as far as costume goes, especially, you're making decisions for yourself. What kind of life decisions did that character make? Are they overweight? Are they gaunt? Or what's their haircut like? Why? Who they're going to their haircut, who's cutting their hair, like who, like like in medieval times, like it's like they didn't have gel, so it's like what's going on, like how like what happens to their hair, things like that, where it's just like kind of thinking of things in terms of the context of everything else around it really helps me narrow and frame what I'm trying to design better.
Perfect.
Sorry if I'm like rambling. I feel like I'm being really tangential here, but
no, but I think this is perfect because if someone is just starting out designing their own characters and they're like, okay, where should I start? Because it can be overwhelming. You have to learn all the fundamentals of drawing, then story and all of that. So this is like really good like place to start thinking about everything what you want to design. And...
Sorry, continue.
No, sorry, just continue.
Because I feel like it's I agree, because I think it's like when you're first starting out, even on a new project, you don't have any context or anything. It's like blank space, that's like really intimidating to be like, okay, there's no rules. I can do anything. How am I supposed to, how do I impress people? What do I do? So it's like giving yourself some boundaries is really important when you're working on a new project. Okay, like, what's the if the demographic, what's the tone of the game, what's the storyline of the game, having all those specificities really gives you some rails to go on, and having it's really good to actually have limitations, because that's kind of what makes specific ideas come out. It's almost like pressure cooking, diamonds. It's kind of the process where it's kind of like having really weird rules. For instance, like no one in this game has eyes. It's like just like really weird stuff. I'm like, wow, shit. How do I work around? Oh, sorry. How do I work around that? So like giving yourself really weird, off the rails limitations is actually a really cool way to come up with ideas too. Yeah.
And also you will design a character in a different way if it is like for 10-year-olds, for kids, or for adults, right? So you can use different references and different styling and all of that. Yeah,
Yeah, the
definitely.
audience, what are kids looking at right now, and how do we stand out from that? Like how do you appeal to kids in other countries? How
Hmm.
do you appeal to, how do you appeal to both, boys, girls, everybody?
Yeah,
How do you appeal to, a wide audience?
yeah, yeah.
So
Plus,
that stuff is like in itself a very difficult challenge.
yeah, yeah.
It's
And
probably one of the hardest.
yeah, definitely. And also, colors have different meanings in different countries and cultures. That's
Yes.
another thing.
Yeah. I definitely, yeah, symbols. That's very difficult. Yeah. I've run into a lot of those situations where I'll be drawing something that's like, oh no, that's actually like the national flag of so and so, and I'm like, damn it,
It's
or
like,
like,
no.
yeah, yeah, you really don't want to use that symbol. I'm like, oh, why? And then they'll like show me some terrible, terrible internet thing, and I'll be like, oh man, like
It's like,
why do people have to ruin everything? It's like, so it's like, yeah, you have to be pretty, especially when you're designing things for like mass entertainment. You really have to be like culturally sensitive to like everything,
yeah,
everything.
and do a research and yeah, all of that. Yeah,
Yeah, I
definitely.
mean,
Yeah.
in a way, and it's like, when you're working in entertainment, it's like, what you're doing is going to be digested by people, and it's
Mm,
going to inform them. Like no matter what. So you have to be responsible.
yeah.
When you're doing that, you can't like leave out an entire group of people or make someone feel isolated. You really have to be inclusionary when you're doing everything. When you're doing things for like mass entertainment.
Yeah.
So, the more specific your ideas are, it's fine. But you just know that um, you're working on a more niche. You're working towards a more niche appeal,
Yeah.
essentially. So, um, yeah, I guess that's what I have to say about that.
Definitely. And so going back maybe to your like daily life and how you draw and creation and motivation, inspiration, how does your normal day look like now, even though you are now in a transition and setting up and all of that? Like how many hours a day do you spend like creatively, and do you do something maybe daily which contributes to your success, like meditation or sport or playing with kid, or you said dancing?
I mean, I dance like 3 times a week. I have like a really weird schedule. So yeah, I mean, I still, even if I'm working from home, I'll still try and work 8 hours a day. And that doesn't necessarily mean I'm drawing for 8 hours a day, because that's very difficult to do. That's a lot of,
It's a
I
lot of
did
drawing.
that, and it's a pain on your hand, like literally it's a pain. So, most of the time I spend just researching and thinking and like looking at stuff and comparing things. And then after I've like absorbed all of it, I'll put all of it away, and I'll just sit down and like just try and draw based on my impression of all those things. Um, that's kind of like how my creative process works. But outside of that, yeah, it's really difficult to um, keep my own schedule right now. So, I have off days, but it's not necessarily like scheduled. It's not like, oh, I'm taking Saturday off. For me, it's just like, well, you're taking in all these contract jobs, so it's like you just really have to have a work life balance that is fair to me.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't want to overwork and I don't want to underwork, and maintaining that is really difficult without setting times for yourself, and being able to really uh, manage not just work time but personal time. Like, I have to hang out. I have pets. I have a girlfriend, not in that order, but I mean, but it's just like
She might
difficult. Like
hear
it's just like
you.
there's a lot. It's really difficult. And dance takes up a lot of my time too. So I run a lot of community. I don't run a lot of communities, but I run community events in the dance scene that I have. I host hustle dance, like disco. I practice that a lot in my spare time. So I want to make time for those things, and those are equally important to me as drawing. Actually, I don't make money off of dance. I make some money, but I don't really make that much money off of dancing. It's not like a career choice, but it's really important for me mentally and physically that I do it. So, um, I still have to make sure that I keep time for that, and
Yeah.
like make myself
And
available to doing those.
So how do you make yourself focused, when you're at home and okay, so now I
That's
have
the
to
hardest part.
create something, like do you put on headphones and you use like focus at will music or something like that?
That's something I'm constantly working on. Working, especially at home, is very easy to get distracted. So right now, what I'm doing is I'm just like turning off all media around me until I sit down and start drawing. And then once I start drawing, I will play music, but I can't play dance music, or otherwise I'll
You
stop
will.
drawing and start dancing. So I have to play like a specific kind of music that's just sort of like low energy, but like really like, cerebral and stuff like that. And then I can kind of trick myself into going into work mode is like how I've been doing it so far. I don't know how successful it is, but and it's also really helpful to have a lot of food handy so that I don't have to leave. Like, because
Just
once
like,
I leave, I might stay outside, I might stay in a coffee shop for a while. So I don't want to do that either. So having a lot of convenience around me is really important for me to stick in one space. Um, what else? Making sure my workspace is cleaner. Like I recently just cleaned everything that I had up because I'm a very messy person. So I'm not, well, I don't know. I don't know. You can see the back here. There's like a lot of stuff back here. But
so you're like,
it's
okay,
been,
okay, I will cover it.
yeah, I'm just gonna do that. But yeah, it's just a lot. And yeah, I'm trying to really just organize my personal space and organize like my schedule in a more meaningful way where I can actually like do it by myself. Yeah.
Yeah. And have you tried
I don't have a lot of advice in that.
But
I don't have a lot
you
of great
had a
advice
lot.
for self-management.
But have you tried Focus at Will music? Have you heard about that?
No, I haven't. What is that?
It's like they have I think they invented this like level of music which is not distracted and it makes you more focused and just being on a
That
point.
sounds
And you
that
can
sounds
choose
exactly like
like
me.
different. Yeah, you have to try it. Okay, we can put a link for under this interview as well about that. And yeah, because you can choose like cafe noises without like people speaking really, or just like classical music or whatever. So you can actually choose what type of music you want without distraction or like high and low points.
Yeah, that sounds like awesome.
Cool,
I'm
cool.
down
So,
for that.
so that's something to try out. and
Yeah.
what about maybe the projects you are like working on now? Something which is not confidential, or something which you can share, or coming up in the future, or maybe something you worked on recently. Everything is confidential. Then we can move on to something else.
I mean, I just worked on Gigantic, and that was like one of the most rewarding projects I've ever worked on, personally. So I really loved working on Gigantic because I really got to do a lot of characters I wanted to do. I'm working on a lot of contract stuff right now, so almost all of it's pretty much NDA. But I'm trying to do my own prints soon because I've never done that before either. So and I've been wanting to for a while. I do like a lot of like pin up and like cheesecake stuff and like just like random drawings that I've thought of doing. I don't know if I'm going to do an art book. Maybe it'd be cool to do an art book. But those are kind of the projects that I really want to work on right now. It's just kind of see what that's like, is like, printing process and things like that. I've spent most of my career in studios, so I haven't had a lot of freelance experience yet. And so it's like pretty much now I'm just trying to like ramp up and like, what's that like? Maybe I should start doing table conventions, and things like that. But it's like a big investment to start that. So I really have to like plan that out,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And
Gotta take some time with that.
is there something you wish you knew over the whole time of your art career? Like advice you would give to young self?
Yeah. I wish I learned when I was younger to not be comparing myself to other artists and other people in general. But I mean, that's one of the things I've really had to deal with is like, it's really, I think it can be toxic to be comparing your ability and your situation to other people, whether you're better than them or worse than them, because by doing that, you're not really thinking about yourself as much. You're just thinking about yourself in the context of this bigger thing, and then that's not very rewarding. If you think you're the best, then it's very good to have confidence. It's good to know when you're good at something. But if you're comparing yourself to other people all the time, being like, oh, this person has more followers, or this person has less followers, or something like that, it's really not. First of all, it's not really an honest view of like how well you're doing. It's really not. Like, there's amazing artists, famous, influential artists. They're not even on Instagram. Like, it's like, like things like that, where it's just like comparing yourself to something that's really has nothing to do with you, even if it's art. So I wouldn't get discouraged by that. I wouldn't get discouraged by being like, oh, this person's more popular than me, or I'm at this level of an artist, because if you think of yourself, like that, it's just not good for your ego. It's just, it's very difficult for me to not do that. But and when I was younger, I was doing it on a more intense scale, where I was, on some degree it's useful to have. It's definitely good to have like peers and colleagues to share work with and be competitive with. That's great, but it's not good but you have to always remember that you're working towards making yourself better, and it's not important for anyone else to, you're not, it's for you. It's not for other people. You're doing all of this for you. So that's why you're an artist. Like, you're not doing it for other people. So it's, being an artist is not easy. So it's, a working artist is like very hard. So if you're going to do that, like, make sure you're doing it for yourself and not other people. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And let's talk about the future. And I have like two last questions. And I would like to know, where would you see yourself in like 5 to 10 years? And like, if you cannot fail, and you have like your dream scenario, everything is how you want.
It's lame, but like, when I was younger, being a professional artist was about as far ahead as I thought. It's like I wasn't really thinking that far ahead. So now that I'm like doing it, I'm like, oh, well, what's my next goal? And I think a lot of people actually come to that realization. Is like, after they achieve their thing when they were like 16, it's like, well, all right, I did it. Now what do I do? Like, what's the next step for me? So, I mean, for now, it's just like, I think for me, I just want to get better. I just want to be a better artist. That's right now. I just really want to work on that. And I think for me, being able to, I have the privilege of being able to do contract work now comfortably. I'm not doing it because I'm like surviving. I'm doing it because I get to pick projects now. So that's a really big advantage that I have right now, and that's very useful to me. But it also gives me time to work on my own projects. So now that I have all this, now that I'm more comfortable in where I am, I'm just trying to figure out, like, what my next step will be, as far as like, maybe I should branch out to other kinds. Maybe I should go more into animation, or maybe I should go deeper into video games. So those are kind of like the next steps for me, is deciding, what next big thing I'm going to be doing. Yeah. I think probably animation would be really cool to get into, like, more. I mean, I've done some of it, like, more for high budget films, but I haven't really like done it full time, like as a contract artist. And so I would like to do that, because it's more story oriented than video games. Video games can get a little repetitive thematically. So, and either finding a game that's not like that, or getting into animation and things like that would be great. Yeah.
I'm curious what you will do in a few years. So yeah, looking forward to see. And and my last question would be about like far future. And this one is the hard one. Like, what would you like to be remembered for in like 100 years or more?
Oh, jeez. I just want to be a cool guy. I just want to be like, oh, that guy was cool.
Good. I like that.
I think just like you'll find me in an art book and be like, oh yeah, he was pretty cool. Or maybe a little wiki bio. Yeah, that's all I care about. I just want to be remembered as being cool. I don't want to be so.
That's nice.
I'm working on that every day.
Yeah, definitely. That's important. So we are nice to each other and just, like building this cool community, so.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
I think when I was younger, I was more obsessed with that idea of like, oh, I have to be like, I must be remembered. I must be immortal. That's why I'm an artist, so I can make my stain on the world and like be influential forever. But again, that comes down to caring what other people think about me. So it's if eliminating fame is seeking fame is really kind of detrimental. It's kind of like because you have to make choices that are for that. So I don't know. It's not necessarily like everything makes me happy doing like trying to be famous. So I don't know if I necessarily need to be remembered, but it'd be great if people do. I mean, yeah, maybe I should make some art books so people have a physical copy of what I have of me in their homes. I guess that would be cool if I had physical copies of myself. If I could be inside people's homes, that'd be great. That sounds really creepy. I'm not trying to rob everybody, but
it's a book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a book. It's a book.
Oh, perfect. And maybe before we say goodbye, you can share the last piece of advice or key takeaway, and then we will slowly finish.
Oh man, this is a lot of pressure. Draw for yourself. Draw for yourself. Don't draw for other people. Be an artist for yourself. I think that's probably what I would take away from this, hopefully, is try and make sure to keep your eye on the prize, which is, making yourself happy and being satisfied, and like don't make art, to I mean, you're always going to be sacrificing a part of your integrity as a commercial artist. Like you just have to, because it's just, you're always going to be working on something that's not necessarily yours. But if you can really make sure that what you're doing is rewarding for yourself, and like really think about like, is this making me happy? And, I think if you can find that work balance where you can compromise a little bit, just to be happy, because a lot of the times, artists can get caught up in kind of torturing themselves to be like, I'm a tortured artist and I have, there's so many things, I think it's eventually you have to find a balance where you're happy. Yeah. So there's really no point in being an artist unless working as an artist, unless you really enjoy what you're doing, because it's really hard work. So, be dedicated to that and like stick to that. I don't know. That's terrible advice, I guess, but I don't know. Maybe that's bad advice, but I just think there's a lot of people get distracted or they can get misled by what the industry is telling them to do, what other people are telling them to do, what their parents are telling them to do. A lot of people can just be misled into thinking a certain way, and you have to really be self-aware and kind of like try and really reach deep down inside and be like, what are my actual goals? Like, what am I really trying to do to make myself happy with art or in general?
Definitely.
And that's, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, being focused, having the right focus, really thinking about what you're focusing on.
Yeah, and set the goal as well, what you want to do, right? As you mentioned, like either working for like studios or for games, right, for animation, for yourself. Yeah. And all those comes with different kinds of compromises. Yeah. Everything has a compromise. Everything has like a work-life balance. Everything, everything's not 100%. But if you can get like 90%, hell, if you can get like 50%, like, and you're already doing very well for yourself, I think. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. And nothing comes for free. We have to work for the goals, right? We want to achieve or be happy, and it's not to like the destination, right? To be happy, but just deciding that this makes me happy and just enjoy the journey.
Yeah. And if drawing doesn't, if working professionally as an artist doesn't make you happy, then, pursue art and just don't do it for a living. I mean, it's not like bad. I mean, you should always be, if you feel that artistic inclination, you should pursue it. That doesn't mean you always have to be making money off of it. Doesn't mean you always have to be like making a living off of it, because art is really there for you. Art is like therapy. All art is kind of that way. When I dance, that's a different kind of like therapy for me. So I rely on these different things to make myself feel better. And if they're not doing that, if I'm getting distracted with all this other crap, then it's not serving my purpose, right? So it's like I have to make sure that I'm drawing for the right reasons, I'm dancing for the right reasons,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Exactly. And I think it's a really good way to just like end this discussion, because it was really inspirational and a lot of tips. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for dealing with my rambling. I feel like I went on so many tangents there, but thank you.
No, it was perfect. It was my pleasure. And thanks everyone for joining, and see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and let me know in comments. Also, please subscribe to my channel for more videos, because I post new interview every single workday. You can also find the resources mentioned in this episode at artsideoflife.com. Just type a guest name in the search bar. There is also a little freebie waiting for you, so go check it out. If you want to listen to the interviews on the go, make sure to check out the podcast episodes at artsideoflife.com/podcast. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you, and don't forget to inspire each other. I will see you guys in the next episode.